Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, back again, and this time we've got an oddball one here. We have a reel that looks like a pen. If you look, you got a plastic handle that kind of resembles the Bakelite handle. You got a nut that very much looks like the pen, then it gets a little bit out of difference here. The body looks like an Ocean City body. It was made in Japan, and I got the question, what is this, among other things. So I did a little bit of research. I found out it's called the Ocean Star, and it was a model manufactured in Japan in the 70s and the 80s for Kmart. So it's attention Kmart shoppers, there's a blue light special, and that's what we have here. We have a reel that's got a spool chirp in it, and unfortunately that's always an indication, or almost always an indication, that the spool is out of round. And if you had a replacement part for that, you could take the chirp out. But right now, I don't believe that there's a replacement part other than finding a donor reel out there that would help do some exchange. And I can kind of see it as I'm turning it. You can feel something of a noticeable skip to it, and that's where the out of round is rubbing against the side plate. And you know that if you tighten this bearing side reel down completely, you'll feel just where it's clipping, and I can feel it here. So if you get a chirp like that, do that. Tighten it down, and then you'll notice whether that spool is out of round or not, which is the problem here. We're going to take this apart. We'll show you the internals of it. We'll try and clean it up internally. There's not much you can do because of the spool issue, but it's always fun to take these apart, see what they're made out of, and get a little history lesson while we're at it. So we'll start by taking off the handle. Do that. There's a set screw in there, just like the pen. You'll notice as we're doing this that I wear a protective glove on my non-working hand, and I also use a little parts basket. Interestingly enough, that nut there appears to be the same size nut as a pen, and it is. I use an aftermarket wrench for the pen handle nut. It's a little bit wider and a little bit longer than the traditional one that comes with pen. But if you have this one, that's fine. And one of the indications it's not pen is it's got a square hole for that gear sleeve, as opposed to the rounded one. So then we have a little felt washer, which is a brace between the adjuster and the gear shaft. I'm just going to take it off together. So that internal one here with the two slots very much looks like the Ocean City. So not quite sure whose technology is being used for what here, but we're going to find out soon enough. Take the star drag adjuster nut off, take the tension washer below that off, and it looks like we have some line wrapped in here as well. That's never a good thing, but I don't believe that's what's holding back the spool here. No, we still have that clank. All right, there's a series of side plate screws here. There's 4 of those. We're going to go ahead and take those off. These are Phillips heads. Again, another indication that is different than the pen. The threading looks the same on them. And I'm laying them out here because sometimes these side plate screws are different sizes. Wow. That one may not want to come off. You always got to be careful because you can break these darn screws. One of the things that's good is that one's moving now, but I'm just going to put a quick spray WD-40 on there, let that kind of sit in. But that's usually an indication that the reel hasn't been serviced, or at least serviced in a while. Now it's moving easier now, so we'll get that out of there. Just want to make sure we didn't damage the screw. We didn't. We got it out. But that screw is shorter than the other one, so you always want to make it a point of checking those so that you know how to put them back in. And that's not uncommon for these types of conventional reels, that the screws that went into the reel seat are shorter than the ones that went into the side posts. Okay, last one. As I mentioned, these are Phillips head I was using. They do have a through point, and when you want, you can use a flat-bladed screwdriver on that, taking the ferrule off of the gear sleeve. Okay, so there's 4 side plate screws that enable us to take that off. And we're just going to watch now as we take this off, because typically you'll have an anti-reverse mechanism in here, and I'm also not certain about how this one is aligning here. Let's take that off and see if we can just pull the the level wind assembly out while we do that. That's not going to come out that way. Okay, so let's just remove this and hopefully we'll get an answer here in terms of that. So here's your level wind. And inside, this is like Franken reel, right? Inside very much looks like a Penn reel. Has a little bit of a different mechanism here. I'm noticing that already for the anti-reverse. The bridge very much looks like a Penn. The jack looks like a Penn. The eccentric looks like a Penn. The spring looks like a Penn. The back of the reels look like Penn. So it says kind of some hybrid in here, but overall it looks like a Penn, but it's not a Penn. And again, it was manufactured in Japan. So let's take this off. Let's figure out this little assembly here and how that anti-reverse dog goes. We'll take a look at the gear levers and the like, and see if we can at least tune this one up. Again, the problem with this reel is one that the spool is out of round, so there's not that much we can do with it. It can be fished. What you would do is you loosen up that bearing to the point where you're not knocking against the side plate all of the time, and that might impact performance a little bit, but you don't have to give up on the reel. But you could just make it a shelf sitter and say this is an example of a reel made in Japan for Kmart, because that's what it is. Okay, we just took that off. We see that there's a little winding screw mechanism for this, spring mechanism for the anti-reverse dog, and we'll just make sure that we reset that. This one is a good place to take a picture if you didn't know what you're doing. If you've never seen the reel, I've never seen the reel, but one of the things that's good about this one is that that spring stayed on there. You can see that the spring nests against this block here, and I imagine what we're going to do is we're going to pull that other one underneath to give us that leverage there. Alright, so again, the jack and the eccentric kind of very much look like Penn. So we'll just pull those off. That should be easy enough to do. Pull this out, pull the two springs out. And I don't know if there was a manufacturing license there or if there was something else that was going on that enabled them to manufacture this way, or if they just changed the technology enough that that they didn't need to. Regardless, the assemblies are very much the same. Okay, I just had a spring shoot. We talk about that all the time. I have a little plastic mat underneath me here that helps me to capture those pieces when they fly. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're just going to grab that spring. I always recommend that you keep your area clean so that in case something like this happens, that you're able to recover that quickly. Okay, so the springs are going to go into my basket. The jack and the yoke are going to go into my basket. The spool gear and the top spring nut. Okay, so let's take this apart. Let's see what we got underneath here. I'm thinking that since all of this kind of looks like Penn, that if we needed drag washers, that we could probably use a 155. But as I'm looking at these, that post is larger, so this is an Ocean City drag kind of a situation here. So they continue to remain flexible. They don't need to be replaced, but they do need to be lubed. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is a typical setup of a drag washer system. It'll have the main gear, a fabric gear, a metal gear, a fabric gear, the keyed washer in the middle, and then the final one up top. There's a little bit of some stuff in here, so I'm going to grab some steel wool. Just going to clean that out. That's probably the dried grease from that backing washer. Okay, and then we'll just do what we would normally do on a conventional reel. We're going to take the Cal's Universal Drag Grease, and we're just going to apply a nice dose on both sides to keep these washers flexible. That's the whole idea behind the drag grease. There's no slip or anything it's trying to do there. What it's trying to do is just keep these washers from drying out. All right, metal washer. I'll do it for a second time here on this one. Just get a nice little dab on both sides. You don't have to over grease these. You're only going to squeeze them out if you do. And you'll wind up with a puddle of grease on the side of your drag washer, but just enough that you got a nice thin coating of it and that it's even. And I use that gloved hand to spread them because I like to keep the contaminants off my hand, and I find that it's the most efficient way to get the coating around those drag washers. Alright, so that's all there is to this one. I'm going to grab my reel oil, come up top, and we'll just throw a little bit in the side bearing there. And grab the blue grease and put some on the eccentric. Then we can reassemble this reel. So we got the two springs, very much like a pen configuration here, for those of you that work on the pens. We've got the eccentric greased, so now we're moving over to the yoke and the jack, so I'm reaching into my parts basket for that. And the spool gear, I'm going to make sure that they're clean, which is, these are not corroded on here, it just has some dried grease sitting in the assembly, so we'll do that. The spool orientation is two sides of that spool gear. There's one that's got a groove in it and one that does not. The one that does not belongs to the back, and that's going to be for the main gear to drive. And one on the front that has the notch. That notch is going to fit into the protrusion on the spool, and that's going to enable it to drive. So make sure when you go to reinstall that you have that orientation correct. And then we'll just take the jack assembly, which is clean, and just like a pen, we can take these, align the springs, get the two holes of the springs over of the yoke over the assembly, and then just push in to seat the jack, and that's just the way that assembly goes. So now we're going to reset the bridge assembly. To do that, we're going to push down on that yoke. We're going to bring the assembly in, and we're going to turn that halfway just like you would a pen, just to cover that spool gear. I'm going to grab the anti-reverse dog. There we go, I just had a little bit of some difficulty there. Grab that anti-reverse dog, seat that on the teeth behind the main gear. And this is where we wanted to pay attention to the orientation of that little post on the spring. And that just, it's going to slip underneath. I'm trying to do a balancing act here. I've got 2 or 3 different things going with this at the moment. And since I haven't worked on one of these, it's always interesting to try and figure out how exactly you want to make this happen. There we go. Now we have it set. Okay, once I have it set, then I can flip this completely through. Just like you would with the pen. Unfortunately, there's probably no manuals for this around anymore, but that's kind of how you learn. Some of this stuff is just by feel. Some of it's just by experience. So we can tighten this up now. should have an there we go, we have an anti-reverse that's working now. It's always good to test it before you try to button it down too much. And tighten up the other side. And we have the two that go up top. Again, very much looking like the pen. They're partially threaded. So from a mechanical standpoint, this reel is going to be able to crank and run properly. The problem is that spool. That spool is not going to work the way we would like it to, but it's not bad enough that it couldn't be fished if it wanted to be. So I understand the fellow that got this purchased it in a flea market or garage sale, didn't pay a lot of dollars for it, was just curious because he thought maybe it was a pen. And I suspect that the person who sold it knew that it wasn't functioning properly, and I don't know if it was disclosed at the time or not, but I guess, you know, $5 or whatever they may have paid for it was okay. All right, here's your worm assembly. I noticed it was working properly before, so what we want to do with this one is try to reassemble this at the same time. I like to put oil on that worm assembly as opposed to grease because I don't like it trapping dirt and the like. This is going to seat into the side plate. As such, it's going to ride into the part there, and it doesn't look like there's anything real complicated about getting this side plate back on. Sometimes with other reels like the pens, you have to double seat that with the bridge, but in this case it looks like it's pretty simple. Line them up and just snap it on kind of a thing, so let's give that a try. If it is, more manufacturers could learn from that for sure. Even though it's an older technology, it doesn't mean it's a bad technology. Okay, so I think we got this lined up. I'm just going to put this side plate on there then, just because it keeps sliding off. Then we can put I'm sure there's someone out there has this reel. I'd be interested to find out what exactly, what more we know about it. Because again, it's kind of the Kmart special here, and oftentimes you don't know that. A lot of these are job lotted. This one's been around a while, but a lot of these, they just make 100,000 of them or something, and then you're done. And they move on, they change the style of the reel, and as we know here, the parts availability is non-existent, and it kind of becomes almost disposable. Fortunately, back in the day, when this reel was coming out, people were still taking these things to get repaired and serviced. Now you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody that could even service these things. And to me, I'm just doing it because it came in with a batch of reels, but it was more of an exploratory to figure out what the heck this reel is, as opposed to we want to make this thing go fishing again. But they're out there, and I did check. I found one site that actually had one for sale, and there wasn't much. So, and I suspect there wasn't much because of the availability of the parts and other things. So, just getting that last screw set now. There we go, set with that. I did take that side plate screw off. Looks like there should be a little bit of oil in there. That's probably what the purpose of this screw was. Go ahead and put that back. And then we can just replace the handle assembly, give it a spin. I'm sure it's going to work just fine. Alright, so we remember then that the ferrule goes on, the metal washer goes on, the star drag nut goes on. Just be careful when you put these star drag nuts on. Sometimes you'll have that shaft rotating. If that's the case, you can hold it down generally like that. And this one, interestingly enough, and it's doing it for me, is like Ocean City. So there's a groove in that, and you can actually hold. You can insert a screwdriver and hold it in there. Wrong screwdriver. But you can get a flat-bladed screwdriver sit it in the grooves, and that'll help you to turn that that knob on until you can clear it for your handle. There we go, we're fine with that. Then we had the little fabric washer one on top of that. And again, if you weren't trusting your memory on how you did this, one of the things that's best to do, put a little bit of oil in that gear sleeve, just like you would a pen. Take pictures along the way. I mean, I've got a video running here. If I really got into trouble, I could go back and rerun my video and say, you know, where was I when this piece showed up, or how did I forget the orientation on that, or something like that. I could go ahead and do that, right? But take pictures along the way. Use your cell phone, use your digital camera and the like, and it'll help answer questions later on if you get stuck. And we all get stuck. I like to say springs fly, parts go missing, parts show up, and memories fail. So here we go. So we've got to continue to have that chirp, and there's nothing you can do about that, but we have a nice functioning reel. And again, if that chirp was annoying enough, we could back this up a little bit. That'll give you more play in that spool. That will take care of the chirp. So we know that the problem is there with that spool, but otherwise, it's an Oceanside. It's missing its badge. Made in Japan, 70s, the 80s, borrowed technologies from Penn in Ocean City. And this one can go fishing again if you don't mind the chirp. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed that. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching.